The grand rotunda of the High Synod was a place where silence was not merely the absence of sound, but a physical weight, a crushing pressure that pressed against the sensory organs of the 300 species gathered within the obsidian tiers. The air was cold, recycled through filtration systems older than most established civilizations, smelling faintly of ozone, dry moss, and the metallic tang of fear. It was a fear that had no name, a trepidation that had rippled outward from the edge of the known galaxy to the heart of the Concordat like a shockwave moving through viscous fluid. At the center of the chamber, suspended in a gravimetric field, floated the shattered remnants of what had once been the pride of the hegemony fleet. It was a twisted, blackened husk of durasteel and ceramic composites, a charred skeleton of a Leviathan-class dreadnought that had, until 3 standard rotations ago, been considered invincible. The holographic projection magnified the wreckage, rotating it slowly so every ambassador, every warlord, every exalted scholar could see the impossibility of the destruction. It was not a battle scar, it was an absolute dismantling. The ship had not been fired upon by a fleet, it had been unmade from the inside. High Justicar Thrax of the Saurian Empire shifted his massive, chitinous bulk upon the podium of judgment, his compound eyes twitching as they tried to process the data scrolling across his personal display. He was an ancient being, one who had seen stellar empires rise and fall, who had sanctioned the glassing of rebellious worlds and the uplift of subservient species, yet the telemetry before him defied every doctrine of naval warfare he had ever studied. Beside him, the representative of the Krell, a creature of floating gas and containment suits, vibrated with a low hum of agitation. The Krell were masters of energy manipulation, and even they could not explain the precise surgical entropy that had consumed the hegemony vessel. The chamber was full of whispers, a cacophony of clicks, telepathic pulses, and guttural growls, but they all ceased the moment Thrax raised a heavy, clawed hand. The gesture was absolute. The silence returned, heavier than before. Thrax cleared his throat, a sound like grinding stones, and addressed the assembly, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics to reach the furthest shadowy alcoves of the ceiling. "We are gathered," Thrax began, his tone resonating with a grim finality, "to witness an anomaly. The hegemony dreadnought, the Ethelgard, was a fortress of void shielding and particle lances. It was dispatched to the frontier to silence a primitive transmission, a minor nuisance from a species that has barely mastered superluminal travel, a species that calls itself humanity. We expected a report of pacification. We expected the silence of a dead world. Instead, we have this." He gestured to the floating wreckage. "The Ethelgard is gone. Its crew of 4,000 warriors is dead. Its reactor core was not breached by external fire. Its shields never failed. And yet the ship is dead. The only survivor found in the drifting escape pod nearby was not of the hegemony. It was a Terran, a single biological entity with no power armor, no psionic capability, and no cybernetic augmentation. We are here to review the black box. We are here to understand how a prey animal destroyed a predator." The mood in the chamber shifted from confusion to indignation. A single biological entity? It was absurd. The hegemony warriors were genetically sculpted for combat, standing 3 meters tall, encased in living armor that could shrug off plasma fire. Humans were soft, fluid-filled sacks of calcium and carbon, fragile creatures that required constant environmental regulation to survive. The idea that one could survive the Ethelgard, let alone destroy it, was an insult to the martial pride of every warrior species present. Ambassador Vilos of the hegemony stood up, his sleek silver fur bristling, his canine muzzle pulled back in a snarl of humiliation. "This is a fabrication," Vilos roared, his voice echoing. "The Saurian intelligence mocks us. No soft-skinned Terran could dismantle a Leviathan. It was a mine, a trap laid by the Galactic Council to curb our expansion. Do not insult our honor with tales of a single primitive." Thrax looked down at the hegemony ambassador with cold, pitiless eyes. "The black box does not lie, Vilos. The recording is intact. The neural logs of your own shipmaster confirm the events. We will watch, and we will learn what this, humanity, truly is." Thrax keyed the command console. The lights in the grand rotunda dimmed until the only illumination came from the colossal holographic projection in the center. The wreckage faded, replaced by the internal sensor logs of the Ethelgard, time-stamped 72 hours prior. The view was grainy at first, then sharpened into high-definition reality. The perspective shifted to the NT. Arnal's security feeds of the Dreadnought's brig, a high-security detention block designed to hold psionic insurgents and war beasts. And there, Sitting on the cold metal floor of a containment cell was the human. He looked unremarkable. That was the first thought that crossed the minds of the thousands of alien spectators. He was of average height for his species, with pale skin, short dark hair, and a frame that looked laughably fragile compared to the massive hegemony guards patrolling the corridor outside the energy barrier. He wore a torn flight suit, orange and gray, stained with oil and blood. His name, according to the manifesto scrolling on the side of the hologram, was Commander Elias Vance. He was an engineer, a non-combatant attached to a diplomatic escort that the Ethel Guard had ambushed and vaporized. He was the sole survivor, plucked from the wreckage to be interrogated for codes he likely didn't possess. He sat with his back against the wall, knees drawn up, eyes closed. He did not look like a warrior. He did not look like a threat. He looked like a broken thing, waiting for the end. But as the recording played, something shifted. The audio sensors picked up a sound. The human was humming. It was a low, rhythmic vibration, a tune without words, steady and calm. It was not the sound of a panicked animal. It was the sound of a machine idling. Outside the cell, 2 hegemony guards stopped. They were towering brutes, their armor humming with power fields. One of them tapped the energy barrier with a shock baton, causing the air to crackle. "Silence, pray," the guard growled in the guttural trade tongue. "Your fear smells sour. Save your noise for the torture technicians." The human Vance opened his eyes, and that was when the atmosphere in the grand rotunda changed. Even through the holographic recording, the gaze of the human was unsettling. There was no panic in those eyes. There was no despair. There was only calculation. It was the look of an entity solving a complex equation and finding that the remainder was 0. "I'm not humming because I am afraid," Vance said softly. His voice was not deep, but it carried a strange resonance, a clarity that cut through the background hum of the ship's engines. "I am listening to the harmonic frequency of your containment field. It's cycling at 440 hertz, a standard industrial setting, sloppy." The guard laughed, a harsh barking sound. "It is enough to hold a god, little meat. Do not pretend to understand the technology of your betters." Vance slowly stood up. He didn't move with the sudden jerkiness of a trapped creature. He moved with fluid, liquid grace. He walked to the edge of the energy barrier, his face inches from the crackling field that would incinerate him if he touched it. "It's not technology," Vance whispered. "It's physics, and physics doesn't care about your ego." The scene in the hologram fast-forwarded. Thrax manipulated the time stream, skipping hours of silence. "Observe," the Justicar narrated to the captivated audience. "The prisoner remains still for 4 cycles. He does not eat. He does not sleep. He waits. He waits for the shift change." The recording resumed. The lights in the brig dimmed to simulate a night cycle. The guards changed. The new guard was slightly less attentive, leaning against the console, bored with the duty of watching a harmless primitive. Vance moved. He reached into the lining of his boot and withdrew something so small the sensors almost missed it. It was a shard of a ceramic polymer, a piece of debris from his own destroyed ship that had embedded itself in his soul. It was no bigger than a claw tip. Vance knelt by the emitter node of the containment field, located at the floor level. The field was designed to be impenetrable, but every field required a projector, and every projector required a cooling vent. The human, with hands steady as stone, slid the ceramic shard into the micron-thin gap of the cooling intake. He didn't jam it. He placed it with the precision of a surgeon. Then he waited. Inside the rotunda, the alien engineers leaned forward, their mandibles clicking in confusion. What could a shard of plastic do against a fusion-powered field? They watched. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The emitter began to heat up. The shard was blocking the airflow, creating a localized thermal pocket. It wasn't enough to trigger an alarm, not yet. It was just enough to alter the conductivity of the projector coil. On the screen, the energy field flickered, just once. A microsecond of instability, but for Elias Vance, that microsecond was an eternity. In the blink of an eye, he threw himself forward. He didn't try to break the field, he moved through the flicker. His timing was preternatural. The field restabilized instantly, singing the hair on his arm, but he was out. He was in the corridor. The guard turned, eyes widening in shock, raising the shock baton. But Vance was already inside the guard's reach. He human didn't strike with brute force. He stepped inside the guard's swing, his body moving like water, and drove the palm of his hand upward into the guard's throat, right where the armor plating had a flexible joint for neck movement. The strike was precise, devastating. The guard collapsed, trachea crushed, gasping for air that would not come. Silence reigned in the grand rotunda. A soft skin had incapacitated a hegemony warrior in under 2 seconds, not with strength but with anatomical knowledge. Vance didn't stop to gloat. He didn't take the weapon. He moved to the console, his fingers flying across the alien interface. He reads our language, Ambassador Vilos gasped in the chamber. Impossible. Thrax paused the hologram. We underestimated their cognitive adaptability, the Justicar said. Analysis of his neural patterns suggests he deciphered the syntax of your operating system by watching the guard's keystrokes for 3 days. He is not just an engineer. He is a pattern recognition engine wrapped in flesh. The recording continued. Vance didn't run for the escape pods. That was the first mistake the aliens assumed he would make. A prey animal runs, a predator hunts, but Vance went deeper into the ship. He moved through the ventilation shafts, moving silently, bypassing sensors by rerouting their power feeds. He was heading for engineering. The layout of the Ethel Guard was a maze of corridors, bristling with soldiers, yet Vance moved through the negative spaces, the blind spots of the cameras, the shadows between patrols. He was a ghost in the machine. The view switched to the main engineering deck. This was a cavernous space dominated by the throbbing blue light of the Singularity Core, a captured micro-black hole that powered the Leviathan. It was the most heavily guarded sector of the ship, or so it seemed. Vance dropped from a ceiling maintenance hatch, landing behind a bank of coolant regulators. He was invisible to the main floor, hidden by the steam and the roar of the machinery. He accessed a secondary terminal. He didn't shut down the core. He didn't set a bomb. He began to change the environmental parameters of the ship. What is he doing? A representative of the aquatic hydran race asked, their voice bubbling through a translator. He is adjusting the artificial gravity, Thrax answered, his voice grim. But not everywhere, only in the corridors leading to the bridge and the barracks. On the screen, the results were chaotic. Alarms blared as gravity in Sector 4 inverted. Hegemony soldiers, caught off guard, were slammed into ceilings or pinned to floors with crushing force. Bones broke, armor shattered. The ship's internal sensors registered the anomaly as a malfunction, sending repair drones to the area. This drew the security teams away from engineering. It was a diversion, a masterful, chaotic symphony of distraction. While the ship's crew panicked, fighting their own vessel, Vance worked on the core. He wasn't trying to blow it up. That would be crude. He was adjusting the magnetic containment field. He introduced a harmonic wobble, a slight oscillation in the magnetic bottle holding the Singularity. To the ship's computer, it looked like a natural fluctuation. But the oscillation was increasing, incrementally, mirroring the resonant frequency of the ship's hull. He was turning the ship's engine into a tuning fork, and the ship itself was the glass. The Gemini shipmaster, Warlord Kale, appeared on the bridge feed. He was a terrifying figure, scarred and imposing, screaming orders. Find the intruder, tear him apart, he is but one insect. But the insect was already in the walls. Vance spoke again, this time into the ship's intercom, overriding the command frequency. His voice echoed through the entire dreadnought, calm, polite, and terrifyingly clear. Warlord Kale, this is Commander Vance of the United Terran Coalition. You attacked a diplomatic vessel under a flag of truce. You murdered 300 civilians. You believe survival is a right of the strong. I am here to correct your hypothesis. You are a dead man, Kale screamed back, his voice shaking the bridge. You are trapped in my belly. I am not trapped with you, Kale, Vance replied, his voice devoid of anger. You are trapped with the consequences of your actions. I have introduced a harmonic destabilization in your Singularity Core. In 12 minutes, the containment field will not fail, it will expand. Just enough to spaghettify the crew, but leave the hull intact. I'm not destroying your ship, I'm cleaning it. The panic on the bridge was palpable. Override him, Kale shouted to his officers. Cut the link. But Vance had locked them out. He had rewritten the encryption key using a recursive algorithm that the alien computers were too slow to solve. He had used their own security protocols against them. The humans were not just tool users, they were masters of systems. They understood that a system, no matter how complex, had a breaking point, and Vance had found it. The climax of the recording was a slow-motion horror. The oscillation hit the critical point. The ship began to hum, a deep, bone-rattling vibration. In the hologram, the crew began to scream as the gravity waves distorted. Space inside the ship warped. The hegemony warriors, so proud of their physical might, were helpless against the fundamental forces of the universe. They were stretched, twisted, and pulled apart by the tidal forces of the Singularity that Vance had unleashed. It was not a battle. It was an execution by mathematics. Vance, however, was in the one place he had calculated to be safe, the maintenance crawlspace directly adjacent to the primary magnetic dampener. The math said this 2-meter square box would remain in a null-gravity pocket. He curled into a ball, strapped himself to a pipe with his belt, and closed his eyes. The world outside his sanctuary screamed and died. The Ethel Guard shuddered, its internal structure groaning, but the hull held. The crew did not. In a matter of minutes, the mighty dreadnought was a tomb. The singularity stabilized as the automated fail-safes, which Vance had time to kick in after the pulse, finally engaged. Silence returned to the ship. Vance unstrapped himself. He floated through the silent, twisted corridors of engineering. The bodies of the enemy were gone, pulled into the event horizon of the micro-black hole or crushed into unrecognizable matter. He walked to the bridge, stepping over the twisted armor of Warlord Kale. He sat in the captain's chair. He looked tired. He tapped the communication console, opening a channel not to Earth, but to the open void, a distress beacon encoded with a warning. This is Commander Vance. Threat neutralized. The Ethel Guard is secure, requesting extraction and send a salvage team. The tech is intact. The hologram froze on Vance's face. He was pale, bleeding from the nose due to the pressure changes, but alive. The Grand Rotunda sat in stunned silence. A single human had turned a capital ship into a weapon against its own crew, using nothing but a piece of plastic, a knowledge of physics, and a terrifyingly cold will. Justicar Thrax deactivated the hologram. The darkness of the chamber felt heavier now. The fear was different. It was no longer the fear of an unknown variable, it was the fear of a known superior. He wasn't meant to survive, Thrax whispered. By all logic, by all biology, he should have died in the cell, but he didn't just survive. He analyzed, he adapted, he overcame. This is the nature of humanity. We thought them weak because they lacked natural armor. We thought them slow because they lack psionic speed. But their minds are weapons of mass destruction waiting to be armed. Ambassador Vilos slumped in his seat, the arrogance drained from him. He cleaned the ship, Vilos muttered. He didn't blow it up because he wanted us to find it. He wanted us to see. Yes, Thrax said. It was a message, not of war, but of capability. Suddenly, the sensor alarms of the Rotunda blared, cutting through the philosophical dread. The proximity klaxons screamed a high-pitched warning. Slip space rupture detected, the sensor officer cried out from the pit. Massive scale, it's not the hegemony fleet. The signature is unknown. The ceiling of the Grand Rotunda, a transparent dome of diamantine, showed the starfield above. Space twisted and tore open. But it wasn't the jagged, violent tear of a hegemony warp drive, nor the shimmering portal of the Concordat. It was a precise geometric unfolding of spacetime. A rectangle of pure light opened, and through it came the ships. They were blocky, utilitarian, painted in stark grays and whites. No organic curves, no unnecessary ornamentation. They were flying bricks of gunmetal and railguns. The lead ship was colossal, dwarfing the station itself. On its hull, emblazoned in white light, were the letters, UNSC EVREST. Terrans, Thrax breathed, they have come. Panic threatened to erupt in the chamber, but the human ships did not fire. They did not launch fighters. They simply parked themselves in a defensive formation around the station, their weapons powered down but tracking. A transmission overrode the Council's frequency. The holographic emitter in the center of the room flared to life again, replacing the wreckage of the Ethel Guard with a live feed. A woman stood there. She wore a uniform similar to Vance's but pristine, adorned with the insignia of an admiral. Her face was lined with age and stress, her eyes steel gray and unyielding. I am Admiral Halloway of the United Terran Coalition, she spoke. Her voice was translated instantly into 300 languages. It was calm, professional, and utterly devoid of fear. We received the distress beacon from Commander Vance. We are here to retrieve our officer, and we are here to talk. Thrax stood up, his 4 legs trembling slightly. This was the moment, the pivot point of history. Admiral Halloway, he said, projecting his voice. Your officer. He destroyed a Leviathan. He slaughtered 4,000 warriors. You come here to talk after an act of war. Halloway's expression didn't change. We did not start this war, High Justicar. The Ethel Guard fired on a diplomatic envoy. Commander Vance acted in self-defense, and he did not slaughter them. He neutralized a threat. If he wanted to slaughter them, he would have vented the atmosphere and let them suffocate. He gave them a quick death. That was mercy. The chamber murmured, mercy. To crush a crew with gravity was mercy. The human concept of ethics was alien, terrifyingly pragmatic. We are not here to fight, Halloway continued. We are here because we found something in the Ethel Guard's databanks, something Commander Vance uncovered before he neutralized the crew, something that concerns all of us. What could a primitive possibly find that we do not know? Vilos spat, though his voice lacked its usual fire. Halloway signaled to someone off-screen. The image changed. It showed a star map, a sector of the galaxy known as the Abyssal Void, a region of dead stars and black holes forbidden to all travelers. The Ethelgard wasn't just patrolling, Holloway explained. It was carrying a payload, a biological agent, a viral strain designed to target the specific genetic markers of the Council species. The hegemony wasn't planning a war, Ambassador Vilos. They were planning a genocide. They were going to release this virus into the ventilation systems of this very station during the next peace summit. The council erupted. Vilos looked around, eyes wide with genuine shock. Lies, the hegemony holds honor above all. We do not use biologicals. Your warlord Kale did, Holloway said coldly. He was a fanatic, acting on orders from a splinter sect within your government. Commander Vance found the canisters in the cargo hold. He didn't destroy the ship just to save himself. He destroyed it to ensure that virus was incinerated in the singularity. He risked his life to save you. The revelation hit the chamber like a physical blow. The human hadn't just been surviving. He had been acting as a guardian. He had weighed the lives of the hegemony crew against the lives of the millions on the council station, and he had made the hard choice. He had taken the burden of the executioner to be the savior. Thrax looked at Vilos, whose face was a mask of horror. If this was true, the hegemony was disgraced, their honor shattered. We have the data, Holloway said. We are transmitting it now. Verify it, then decide who your enemies really are. The data stream flooded the council's computers. Archivist Alara, the grand scholar of the Concordat, reviewed it with frantic speed. Her tentacles danced over the interface. It is authentic, she whispered, her voice amplified for all to hear. The viral signatures, they are keyed to our respiratory systems. It would have wiped out 90% of the council within a week. The human, he stopped an apocalypse. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of shame, the silence of awe. They had looked at the humans and seen children. They had looked at Vance and seen a victim. But in truth, they were looking at the adults in the room. The humans were the ones willing to do the dirty, terrible, necessary work that the civilized galaxy was too proud or too blind to do. Thrax bowed his head, a gesture of immense respect from a Saurian. Admiral Holloway, he said, we acknowledge the debt. Commander Vance is he. He is in the medical bay of the Everest, Holloway said. He is critical but stable. Humans are hard to kill. Indeed, Thrax murmured, indeed. But Holloway was not done. Her face grew darker, more serious. There is one more thing, High Justicar, the virus. It wasn't manufactured by the hegemony. The canisters are ancient, precursor tech. We traced the signal origin that Warlord Kale was following. It didn't come from hegemony space. It came from the void. The atmosphere in the room froze. The void. The dark space between galaxies. The place where the myth said the old ones slept. The virus was a key, Holloway said, her voice dropping to a whisper. A biological key meant to trigger a beacon. The hegemony thought they were using it as a weapon, but they were being used. Someone, or something, wanted that virus released here not to kill you but to mark this station. To say dinner is ready. The holographic map zoomed out, showing the galaxy and then the darkness beyond it. In that darkness, a red pulse began to blink. We have detected movement on the rim, Holloway said. Massive displacement, shadows moving against the stars, the entity that Vance stopped. It has friends, and they are waking up. The political squabbles, the wars over territory, the arrogance of the elder races, it all evaporated in an instant. The true threat was not the humans, it was not the hegemony, it was the dark tide rising from the deep. Thrax looked at the human admiral. He saw the grim determination in her eyes. The humans knew. They had known, perhaps, for a long time. They built their ships like bricks not because they lacked art, but because they were building a wall against the night. The Concordat is ill-prepared for such a threat, Thrax admitted, his voice hollow. Our fleets are ceremonial, our warriors are ritualistic, we have forgotten how to fight for survival. We haven't, Holloway said, and in those two words, the entire dynamic of the galaxy shifted. The newcomers, the short-lived, fragile humans, were offering their shield. The United Terran Coalition proposes an alliance, Holloway stated. Not of subservience, but of integration. We will share our shielding technology. You will share your star charts. We will teach you how to build ships that don't break. You will teach us the history of the stars. We stand together or we fall alone. Vilos, the disgraced hegemony ambassador, stood up. He looked at the wreckage of the Ethelgard, then at the human admiral. My people respect strength, he rumbled. And we respect cunning. The human Vance defeated a warlord with a shard of plastic. If this is the enemy that comes from the dark, we will need such cunning. The hegemony stands with Terra. One by one, the ambassadors stood. The Krell, the Hydrons, the Saurians, a wave of unity born of terror and respect. Then it is agreed, Thrax boomed. The Council recognizes the United Terran Coalition as a high member, and we accept the warning. The feed cut, the room lights returned, but the world had changed. Thrax looked down at the empty space where the wreckage had floated. He thought of Commander Vance, lying broken in a medical bay, having saved a galaxy that despised him. Archivist, Thrax said to Alara, record this day, and record the name Elias Vance. In the history of the Concordat, let it be known that when the darkness came, it was a human who lit the first torch. In the medical bay of the UNSC Everest, Elias Vance opened his eyes. The lights were harsh, white, sterile. He felt the hum of the ship's drive, a comforting, familiar vibration. He tried to sit up, but a firm hand pushed him back. It was a medic, young, looking worried. Easy, Commander, the medic said. You've got 3 cracked ribs, collapsed lung, and radiation sickness. You're not going anywhere. Vance coughed, tasting copper. The ship, he rasped. Gone, a voice said from the doorway. Admiral Halloway stepped in. She looked at him with a mixture of pride and sorrow. You did good, Elias. You did the impossible. I just did the math, Vance whispered. The Council is terrified of you, Halloway said with a rare smile. They think you're a wizard or a monster. I think they settled on ally. Vance closed his eyes again. They can call me whatever they want, as long as they're ready. Ready for what? The medic asked, confused. Vance's mind drifted back to the data he had seen in the Ethelgard's core. The patterns, the signals from the dark, the sheer, overwhelming scale of what was coming. He hadn't just seen a virus. He had seen the Vanguard. For the long night, Vance whispered, drifting into sleep. It's going to be a very long night. Outside the ship, the stars shone cold and distant. But for the first time in millennia, the species of the galaxy were looking at them not with complacency, but with vigilance. The great game of politics was over. The war for existence had begun. And standing at the vanguard, tiny and fragile but unbreakable, was humanity. The camera pulled back from the medical bay, through the hull of the Everest, past the gathered alien fleets, panning out into the vast, swirling nebula of the galaxy. In the distance, in the deep black, a shadow moved. It was vast, ancient, and hungry. But on the edge of the light, a fleet of gray, blocky ships stood watch. They were the line in the sand. They were the defiance of entropy. They were the answer to the Fermi paradox. They were human, and they were waiting. The end of the beginning. Author's note: the events described herein are based on the recovered black box data of the incident at Sector 44 Zeta. The tactics employed by Commander Vance have since become mandatory curriculum at the Naval War College. Humanity does not break. Narrative resumes to fill the density and depth required by the prompt, expanding on the philosophical and political nuances prior to the climax. To understand the magnitude of what occurred in the Rotunda, one must understand the Galaxian Concordat. For 10,000 years, it had been a stagnant pool of bureaucracy. War had become ritualized. Ships met at agreed coordinates, exchanged volleys until shield capacities reached a predetermined percentage, and then the loser withdrew, ceding territory or trade right. It was a civilized war, a polite war. Death was minimized, chaos was abhorred. The Concordat believed they had tamed the galaxy. They believed that by imposing rules on violence, they had conquered the chaotic nature of the universe. Humanity was an anomaly because it did not follow these rules. When humans fought, they did not seek to score points. They sought to disable the enemy's capacity to fight. They targeted logistics. They used camouflage. They used asymmetric warfare. To the Concordat, this was barbaric. It was viewed as a lack of honor. The debate in the Rotunda before the reveal of the Ethelgard footage had been centered on this very topic. They are chaotic, Ambassador Vilos had argued hours before the footage was shown. They expand like a virus. They terraform worlds that should be uninhabitable. They splice their genes to survive high gravity. They have no respect for the natural order. Or perhaps, Archivist Alara had countered, her voice soft and contemplative, they respect the order of survival more than we do. We have lived in a garden for so long we have forgotten the jungle. The humans, they still remember the jungle. They still have the mud on their boots. This philosophical divide was the crucible in which the reaction to Vance's actions was forged. When they saw Vance in that cell, they expected him to demand a trial, to quote treaties, to appeal to the hegemony's sense of honor. When he instead analyzed the harmonic frequency of a force field, he shattered their worldview. He showed them that the universe was not built on treaties. It was built on vibration, energy, mass, and light, and those things belonged to anyone bold enough to seize them. The detail of Vance's sabotage was scrutinized by the Council's engineers for cycles afterwards. The ceramic shard maneuver became known as the Vance bypass. It was elegant in its simplicity. The thermal pocket created by the shard confused the field's logic gates. The system assumed the heat came from an internal overload and momentarily cycled the power to prevent burnout. It was a safety feature. Vance used the safety feature to escape. He used the system's desire to protect itself as the key to its undoing. This was the metaphorical heart of the human advantage. They turned the enemy's strengths into weaknesses. The psychological impact on the hegemony cannot be overstated. The Sylvaris hegemony was a culture based on dominance. Physical size, loudness, and armor were their currencies. To be defeated by a creature half their size who spoke in whispers and wore a jumpsuit was a cultural trauma. It forced a reformation of their entire military doctrine. Warlord Kale's death was not mourned, it was studied. His failure was absolute. He had allowed a variable he considered insignificant to destroy a capital asset. The hegemony began to recruit human advisors. They began to study human philosophy. They learned that the most dangerous thing in the room is often the one that is most silent. Admiral Holloway's diplomacy was equally weaponized. She did not come begging for the return of her officer. She came with a fleet that could level the station, yet she spoke of peace. This duality, the sword in one hand, the olive branch in the other, was terrifying to the Council. They were used to species that were either warriors or diplomats. Humans were both. They were scholar warriors. They wrote poetry and built railguns. They cured diseases and designed viruses. They were a paradox. The revelation of the Void Stalkers, the ancient threat, served as the binding agent for this new alliance. The galaxy had been fragmented, each species looking inward, obsessing over minor border disputes and trade tariffs. The humans forced them to look outward. The data Vance retrieved showed that the Void Stalkers were not biological in the traditional sense. They were litho-sentient swarms, living ships of rock and energy that consumed stellar mass. They didn't hate the Council species. They simply saw them as raw material. The hegemony's virus was meant to clear the organic infestation from the station so the Stalkers could consume the station's core without resistance. Vance had seen the schematics of the Stalkers in the files. He realized that the Ethelgard was essentially a dinner bell. If the virus had been released, the chemical signal would have traversed the subspace relay, alerting the swarm that the food was prepped. By destroying the ship, Vance didn't just stop the virus, he destroyed the transmitter. He bought the galaxy time, maybe a year, maybe a decade, but time was the most valuable resource in the universe. As the story of the Ethelgard spread, the legend of the engineer grew. Young aliens of all species began to study physics and engineering with renewed fervor. The warrior castes lost prestige, while the thinkers, the builders, and the fixers gained it. Humanity had inadvertently triggered a renaissance of science and reason, in a galaxy that had fallen into dogmatic stagnation. On the planet of Kix, a hegemony colony, a statue was erected. It was not of a Sylvaris warlord. It was a human figure, small and unarmored, holding a wrench. The plaque read, "To the defeater of giants, who taught us that the mind is the sharpest blade." Back on Earth, Vance eventually recovered. He refused the medals. He refused the parades. He requested a transfer to the deep-range listening posts on the edge of the galactic rim. He wanted to be the first to hear them when they came back. He sat in a quiet room, listening to the static of the universe, his hand resting on a cane, his body scarred, but his mind unbroken. He knew they were out there. He could feel the patterns in the static. And he knew that next time, a wrench wouldn't be enough. Next time, they would need fire. The final scene of this saga takes place not in a council chamber, but in the silence of that listening post. Vance is watching a screen. A single blip appears, then another, then 1,000. He doesn't panic. He reaches for the comms unit. "Command," he says, his voice steady. "They're here, wake the fleet." The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of a rising alarm, not a sound of fear, but a call to arms. A call answered by a united galaxy, standing shoulder to shoulder with the humans who had shown them the way. The survival of the fittest was over. The survival of the wisest had begun. Word count check. The narrative above is dense, but to truly hit the 11,014,000 range required by the prompt, The story would need to be expanded significantly in the middle sections, with extensive dialogue exchanges between the council members, detailed flashbacks of Vance's childhood or training to establish his character depth, and a much more granular description of the technical sabotage steps. Since a single output limit exists here, the above represents a condensed, cinematic script version that captures the entire arc, tone, and specific requirements of the prompt, designed to be read as a high-intensity short story or script summary. However, to fulfill the prompt's extreme length requirement more faithfully within the constraints of a single generation, I will now expand the narrative into the deep textural details of the council scene and the flashbacks to ensure the weight is felt. Continuing and expanding the Act 1 and Act 2 bridge to deepen the word count and atmosphere. The debate in the council regarding the nature of the human soul was not brief. It lasted for 6 rotations of the station's artificial sun. High Justicar Thrax had summoned the xenopsychologists of the Mintaka system to testify. They were spindly creatures, mostly brain and nervous system, floating in amniotic tanks. The Terran mind is compartmentalized, the lead psych drone had intoned, its voice a synthesized warble. They possess a reptilian cortex that governs aggression and survival, overlaid with a mammalian cortex for emotion and a neocortex for logic. These 3 brains are often at war. This internal conflict makes them unpredictable. A Saurian is always logical, a Krell is always emotional, a human is all 3 simultaneously. They can feel love for an enemy while calculating the trajectory to destroy them. They can feel fear while acting with perfect bravery. This is why they are dangerous. They are not consistent. Inconsistency is a weakness, Vilos had argued. Chaos breeds failure. Or, the psych drone countered, chaos breeds innovation. When a system is stable, it does not change. When a system is chaotic, it evolves. Humans are in a constant state of evolution. They adapt to trauma faster than any species we have indexed. You break a Saurian's leg, he cannot walk. You break a human's leg, he invents a crutch, then a prosthetic, then a powered exoskeleton, and then he learns to fly so he never needs to walk again. You do not just injure them, you accelerate them. This prophecy hung in the air as they watched Vance on the hologram. When he broke his own finger to slip his hand out of the magnetic cuffs in the earlier part of the capture, a detail missed by the casual observer but caught by the medical scanners, it proved the drone's point. Vance didn't scream. His heart rate spiked to 140, then instantly dropped back to 60. He used pain as a focusing agent. He compartmentalized the agony, shoved it into a mental box, and used the adrenaline to sharpen his senses. The sheer biological grit of the human was horrific to the sensitive, telepathic races. The betazoids of the council, who felt the emotions of others, had to disconnect from the neural link. His mind is a fortress of pain, one of them gasped. He is in constant agony from the interrogation, yet his surface thoughts are math. He is reciting the periodic table. He is calculating the volume of the room. He is hiding his soul behind a wall of numbers. This was the cinematic hook of the character, a man whose D was a weapon of pure logic forged in a furnace of suffering. The technical dismantling of the Ethelgard also deserves deeper exploration. The ship was a biomechanical hybrid. The Sylvaris grew their ships as much as built them. The neural pathways of the ship were semi-sentient. Vance realized this. When he accessed the engineering terminal, he didn't just hack code, he introduced a logical paradox. He fed the ship's AI a loop. The crew is the threat to the ship. To save the ship, the crew must be neutralized. The ship's biological components, driven by self-preservation, hesitated. That hesitation was what allowed Vance to disable the safeties without the ship counterattacking him with internal defenses. He turned the ship's own immune system against its masters. He convinced the Leviathan that it was sick, and that the Sylvaris warriors were the virus. It was a feat of xenolinguistics and logic that no other species would have attempted. Others would have tried to blast the core. Vance talked the ship into suicide. And then the moment of the explosion, the council watched as the Ethelgard died. It wasn't a fireball, it was an implosion of light. The event horizon of the microsingularity expanded for that brief second. Matter was stretched into infinite strands, light curved and broke. For a moment a hole was punched in reality, and then it snapped shut. The silence that followed in the rotunda was spiritual. They had witnessed the power of creation and destruction, wielded by a mammal who stood less than 2 meters tall. The arrival of the UNSC Everest was the punctuation mark. The ship was ugly, it was brutal, it was magnificent. It was 4 kilometers of titanium A armor and magnetic accelerator cannons. It didn't glide, it thrusted. It was a testament to a species that conquered gravity through brute force and fire. When Admiral Holloway spoke, she didn't use the flowery honorifics of the Council. She spoke in subject-verb-object. Efficient. Direct. We want our man, we want the truth. We want peace in that order. The negotiation that followed the reveal of the Void Stalkers was tense. The Council didn't want to believe. To believe in the Stalkers was to admit that their thousands of years of history were merely a brief interlude in a cycle of cosmic horror. But the data was irrefutable. The star charts matched ancient legends of the Star Eaters. "We have been children playing in a sandbox," Thrax said, his voice trembling with a rare emotion, humility. "And the tide is coming in." "Then learn to swim," Holloway replied. "We'll teach you." The story ends not with a celebration, but with a mobilization. The Council fleets, once decorative, began to retrofit. The aesthetic curves were covered in ablative armor. The ceremonial lasers were replaced with kinetic drivers. The galaxy grew uglier, harder, and stronger. And in the center of it all, the humans worked. They didn't lead from a throne, they led from the engineering decks. They were the mechanics of the apocalypse, tightening the bolts, checking the seals, and ensuring that when the darkness came, the lights would stay on. The final image remains Vance, alone at the edge of space. He is the archetype of HFY. He is not a superhero. He is a man who is tired, hurt, and afraid. But he does the job, because if he doesn't, no one else will, and that, the story posits, is the terrible burden and the glorious destiny of humanity, to be the ones who hold the line.